Hello cringers, I am back from a long break. I have spent all of my time having hot sex and arguing on Twitter. Make sure to follow me. I am, however, back on my shit, meaning one video is going to be uploaded per month. So you had better subscribe, only a small percentage of my viewers are, or else I will start making SpaceX Starship Mars by 2025 game over and change my channel name to Tech Kiwi or something. Anyway, welcome to Astro Kiwi's Ultimate Rocket Tier List. Remember, these are obviously my opinions, and not every rocket ever has been included, so don't lose your shit if Electron Clone number 1,000,000 or some obscure sounding rocket from the 50s isn't on the list. The qualifications for being on the list are basically if the launch vehicle is notable, interesting, or historic. So again, I'm not going to be ranking every single variant of Titan or whatever. With that out of the way, let's get to the tier list. Starting with... First up, we have Falcon 9. Falcon 9 is one of the most recognizable and iconic launch vehicles of all time. It carries crew and supplies to the ISS via the Dragon 2 capsule, and is notable for its reusability. The boostback and drone ship landings have become a staple of modern spaceflight. Falcon 9 goes in high A tier.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
The Saturn V is not only iconic, it's legendary. Arguably humanity's most important piece of technology, it carried 12 people to the moon, and it also carried Skylab, the first ever American space station, into orbit. Saturn V is so iconic that most people, even outside of the space community, know about it. It inspired an entire generation of astronauts and engineers and scientists. The effect of this rocket on the world cannot be understated. The Saturn V can only be put in S tier. Venture Star, the first and arguably one of the coolest SSTOs on this list. It was proposed as a replacement for the space shuttle, but it was cancelled in 2001. An interesting feature of the Venture Star is its 7 linear aerospike engines. On the one hand, Venture Star is a pretty cool concept. On the other hand, SSTOs are cringe. D tier. Now, as a Kiwi, I may be a little bit biased here, but Electron is currently the leader of the small-sat launch market. The first stage is reusable, the engines are the first 3D printed electric pump-fed engines to ever reach space, and Electron is also the first and only fully carbon composite rocket to ever reach orbit, and it launches from New Zealand. A tier. OTRAG. Delta IV Heavy is pretty fucking badass. It sets itself on fire, it can be human rated, and it looks just plain cool. It has the second highest payload capacity of any currently flying rockets, and it has a much higher payload volume limit than Falcon Heavy, which has the highest payload capacity of any currently flying rocket. High B tier. Long March 7 is China's replacement for the less powerful Long March 2F. It has a payload capacity to LEO of 13.5 tons, which puts it in the same ballpark as Atlas V and Falcon 9. It is worth mentioning that both Atlas V and Falcon 9 can both be modified to smash that payload to LEO by about 10 tons. It is also worth noting that no hypergolic fuel stages are used on the Long March 7. They either use RP1 or liquid hydrogen, which is definitely an improvement over some other Chinese-made rockets. A solid C tier rocket. Vega is quite an interesting little rocket. It's fairly cheap with a price tag of $37 million US and relies on 3 solid rocket stages to reach orbit. It's only been flying since 2012 and it already has an evolved variant in the works. The evolved variant is set to utilize a liquid methane upper stage. Unfortunately, Vega has a fairly poor reliability. Only 88% of launches of Vega have been successful. High D tier. Titan 3, or more specifically Titan 3E, is an old school badass medium to heavy launch vehicle. Notable payloads include Voyager 1 and 2, as well as both Viking missions. The first 2 stages use hypergolic NTO and Erosine 50, which is cringe. It has 2 solid fuel boosters and the option for a dual centaur upper stage. Despite its flaws, the Titan IIIe has the advantage of looking fucking sexy, while unfortunately being operationally kind of boring. D tier. Despite Energia's main payload being Buran, it could also fly in the Energia Polyus configuration, without the Soviet space shuttle. It has a whopping payload capacity to low Earth orbit of 100 tons. Unfortunately, this Soviet-era super heavy launch vehicle only saw flight twice. It came online in 1987, only 5 years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Energia almost seemed like a last hurrah from the Soviets to try and catch up with the Americans, who at the time had been flying the space shuttle for years. High B tier. Titan IV was the best of the generation before the Atlas V and Delta IV Heavy rockets. Think of it as the PlayStation 2 of launch vehicles. It was flown 39 times from 1989 to 2005 before being replaced by Atlas V. It had a couple of failures, and it was in the Titan family of rockets, so it used toxic hypergolic fuels, and like its younger sibling, it is a bit boring. D tier. Launcher 1 is Virgin Orbit's air-launched small-sat launch vehicle. It can deliver 500 kilograms to Leo. Though it has comparable stats to Electron, it is 50% more expensive. Though I do have to say, air-launched rockets are inherently cool. Low B tier. Arca's Eco Rocket. Obvious S tier. Terran R is a recently announced fully reusable, essentially a miniature Starship by Relativity Space. Personally, I actually think the renders of the Terran R look better than Starship. With a payload capacity to Leo of 20 tons, Terran R is in direct competition with Falcon 9, though Falcon 9 of course is only partially reusable. Terran R certainly has a lot of potential, and I am very much looking forward to seeing if it can meet the goals that Relativity Space has set for it. Low A tier. New Glenn will be Blue Origin's first orbital rocket. The first stage will be reusable, and the rocket will have a huge payload capacity to Leo of 45 tons. Not only that, it also has a huge payload fairing, avoiding being volume limited. This could make New Glenn a mega constellation building workhorse. It fills a niche where its payload capacity is too high to be a heavy lift launch vehicle, but too low to be a super heavy lift launch vehicle. Despite being infamous and kind of a meme in the spaceflight community, New Glenn does have the potential to be a very successful rocket. High C tier. SRB-X. No. F tier. The Saturn 1B was used to test the hardware of the Apollo Command and Service module before the Saturn V took over and eventually sent humans to the moon. Saturn 1B also launched all of the crew up to Skylab, and also launched the Apollo Command module for the Apollo-Soyuz project. B tier. Delta Clipper, or the DCX, is a vertical takeoff, vertical landing, 1/3 scale prototype. It was a cool concept, but ultimately a dead-end one. E tier. Atlas V is an extremely successful and insanely reliable rocket. It has had 86 launches and only one partial failure. It can be customized to have anywhere from an 8.2 ton to an 18.8 ton payload capacity. It carries the Starliner capsule and has carried many notable and historic payloads, including Starliner, the X-37B spaceplane, OSIRIS-REx, New Horizons, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, the Perseverance rover, the InSight lander, the Curiosity rover, and many others. A tier. See, some people like Eris 1 and think that it's underrated or something. This thing was a terrible idea. Look, David Willis, I'm sorry, but this fucking thing is a waste of solid rocket boosters, and there is a reason it only flew once. E tier. Mercury Redstone is historic, but suborbital. Unfortunately, it was completely outmatched by Vostok, which skipped being suborbital entirely and went straight to a fully orbital flight. High E tier. The Long March 5 is China's most powerful rocket. It made headlines around the world earlier in the year after its upper stage made an uncontrolled re-entry after it launched the Tianhe core module. It is worth mentioning that none of the stages that could fall on populated areas use hypergolic fuels. Good job, China. E tier. Delta II is another extremely reliable launch vehicle from United Launch Alliance. It flew 155 times and only had one failure and one partial failure. It had a fairly low payload capacity to Leo with a maximum capacity of 6.1 tons. It launched a few historical payloads, including the Mars lander Phoenix and the iconic rovers Spirit and Opportunity. A cool thing about the Delta II is the staging of the 9 SRB variant. At launch, only 6 were ignited. Once these were depleted, the other 3 SRBs, optimized for high altitude operation, ignited, and the depleted boosters were jettisoned. Delta II gets to be a high C tier. Minotaur, also known as the banana rocket due to the insulation that peels off of the rocket during launch, is derived from old Minuteman ICBMs from the US military. It has 4 solid fuel stages and delivers only 580 kilograms to LEO. Despite the low payload capacity, the funny banana peeling makes up for it in my books. Low C tier. Roton. I hate it, it shouldn't exist. F, it's worse than SRBX. Pegasus is literally an older and more expensive version of Launcher 1. D tier. Ah, Proton. It's uncanny how easy it is. Proton has launched most of the Russian sections of the ISS, and it looks pretty fucking cool. However, every single stage of Proton uses hypergolic fuels. So frankly, the sooner Proton is replaced by Angara, the better. High E tier. Ariane 4, yet another hypergolic fueled medium lift launch vehicle. It had 113 successful flights and was a workhorse for the ESA for just over a decade. Unfortunately, it looks horrific. High E tier. PSLV, or the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle, is built and operated by the Indian Space Research Organisation, also known as the ISRO. It's actually pretty cheap for a medium-lift launch vehicle, but only has a payload capacity of 3.8 tons, and uses hypergolic fuels on its 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stages. It is worth noting that the stages that use hypergolic fuels will either burn up on re-entry or land in the ocean far, far away from populated areas. Low D tier. The Long March 2F is essentially China's version of Soyuz, except this version of Soyuz has the habit of dropping boosters filled with deadly carcinogenic and corrosive hydrazine and dinitrogen tetroxide on rural villages full of innocent civilians. Shenzhou is a cool capsule, but please launch it on a rocket that doesn't pose a risk to the public. This is an F tier, below the Eco rocket. I know we like to shit on Arca, but this rocket actually poses a genuine threat to the lives of innocent people, and China has been and continues to be grossly negligent about where their boosters land. Astro's Rocket 3 is essentially a smaller and cheaper Electron. They have a beautiful launch site and their rocket does look pretty cool. Low B tier. Okay, so I might get some hate for this, but I think SLS is a ridiculously fucking cool rocket. I mean, if you want to see me fangirling over SLS, you can watch my video on it, but seeing those 5-segment SRBs separating from the core stage is truly going to be something else. Until it launches, SLS will be high A tier. After that, it might make it into low to medium S tier. Okay, so hear me out here. Jupiter 3 is actually a really fucking cool concept. Obviously it's shuttle derived and has some very interesting features. It has 2 of the space shuttle's orange external tanks and 4 space shuttle solid rocket motors. At launch, all 4 SRBs ignite along with 5 upscaled RS-68B engines, which Team Vision, the designers of this thing, called RS-100s. If you don't know, the RS-68 is the engine used on the Delta IV and Delta IV Heavy rockets. After the SRBs are expended and jettisoned, the RS-100s, fed by the shuttle external tanks, keep burning until they run out of hydrogen, at which point the tanks and the engines both jettison from the rocket, revealing 5 J2X engines. After that stage was burned to completion, another upper stage with 2 more J2X engines was revealed. All this meant that Jupiter 3 had a payload capacity of 160 metric tons to translunar injection, not low Earth orbit. SLS Block 2 has a payload capacity of 46 tons to TLI, and Saturn V had a payload capacity of 48 tons to TLI. So laugh at me all you want, but this rocket is low A tier. It's fucking dope and I will die on this hill. Like many, I do have a distinct nostalgia for the space shuttle. It was flying since I was a kid, and I remember back 10 years ago now when it was retired. The space shuttle is an incredible launch vehicle. Despite its flaws, it inspired a generation of engineers, researchers, and astronauts, and it does hold a special place in my heart. S tier. New Shepard, Bezos penis rocket. F tier. Nah, there is a lot of cool shit that New Shepard does. If I can separate Musk from SpaceX, I can do the same with Bezos and Blue Origin. New Shepard is a suborbital rocket with the largest windows ever to go to space. Pretty cool. The booster is fueled by hydrogen, epic, and when it comes back down to Earth, it does this funky thing where it puts out some air brakes and fins and then decides that actually it doesn't want to die, unlike most Amazon employees. Fuck, I said I wouldn't. It lands itself, alright? Low D tier because it's suborbital, but it's also reusable and lands itself. Miura 5, basically a Spanish version of Electron, low C tier. GSLV, or Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle, is yet another launch vehicle with hypergolic fuels on its first stage and/or boosters. Mid E tier. Those who follow my Twitter, you will know why I don't exactly like the Ariane 1. Here's the context. Basically, when I was a kid, I had a model of an Ariane 1, and one day I accidentally stood on it and it punctured my fucking foot, so I will have a grudge against this rocket until the day I die. Orbex Prime, Scottish Electron, low C tier. So the Kistler K1 is an interesting little launch vehicle, designed by a company called Kistler Aerospace, who in the very early days of SpaceX sparred with them quite a bit over NASA resupply contracts. The K1 is a medium lift launch vehicle and could deliver 4.5 tons to low Earth orbit. The interesting thing about it is that it was fully reusable. Both stages would return to Earth using heat shields, parachutes, and airbags. Unfortunately, Kistler declared bankruptcy way back in 2010. Low D tier. Mercury Atlas, classic and iconic, very epic, very cool, and I don't really have that much more to say on it. B tier. I genuinely think that the Falcon Heavy test flight was one of the most memorable moments in space history, full stop. It made everyone, interested in space or not, pause for a moment and think to themselves, hey, that rocket launched a car into space, then landed itself. That's pretty fucking cool. It was a very inspiring launch to watch, and even separated from the spectacle of that launch, Falcon Heavy is a very good launch vehicle. I cannot wait for the double drone ship landing later on in the year. Low S tier. Slightly bigger Electron, medium C tier. For me, Starship is in a similar place to SLS. The hardware they've assembled so far is insanely cool, and the concepts for both rockets are insanely cool too. Starship will remain in high A tier for now, and if it ends up operational and the promises are kept, it will end up on par with or higher than the Saturn V. Embarrassingly, I am a bit of a fan of Antares. To me, this is your bog standard rocket. When someone thinks of a rocket, they think of something like this. Antares is built by Northrop Grumman and is mainly known for launching the resupply cans, also known as the Cygnus spacecraft, to the ISS for resupply. $80 to $85 million is a bit steep in comparison to Falcon 9, but interestingly, Antares' payload capacity to Leo is exactly 8 tons, the same as Neutron's. Another solid B tier rocket. Angara was designed by Russia after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1992, and its purpose was to replace Proton and Soyuz, which are both manufactured in other countries. Since then, it has only flown 3 times, though one of those flights was only suborbital, so it has only been to orbit twice. Despite Roscosmos apologists touting Angara as a potentially reusable future competitor for Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, it has yet to be proven, and by the time it comes fully online, it will likely already be outdated. Dr. Von Braun, you were called here to tell us about your new Sea Dragon rocket. Could you explain it to us, how it works?
The Sea Dragon rocket is named as such because you will see me dragging these nuts across your face.
Well, if you
Fight me. Sea Dragon is the coolest rocket ever designed, not just because it's the biggest either. I mean, a payload capacity to Leo of 550 tons, even Starship has nothing on that. Supposedly, the cost per kilogram in 2020 dollars is $500 to $5,000. I love how it's built in a shipyard and towed to the launch site. I love how the Vernier engines look and work. I love how the first stage would be fueled with RP-1 while at the shipyard, then once it was towed out to the launch site, a support barge would use electrolysis on site to produce the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen for the first and upper stage. Now, I'm not saying that I want to live in the For All Mankind timeline where it actually flew. What I am saying is that if I could marry Sea Dragon, I would. S tier. How the hell am I supposed to rate a British rocket launched from Australia as anything higher than F tier? Okay, in all seriousness, the fact Britain developed their own orbital launch vehicle, tested it, launched it twice, and then abandoned it is reason enough to put it in F tier. Delta IV, it's weird and I don't like it. High D tier. This is essentially Europe's more powerful version of Russia's Angara rocket. It is intended to replace the aging Ariane 5 rocket and can lift 10 to 21 tons to low Earth orbit. Like Angara, Ariane 6 will likely already be outdated by the time it comes online. That being said, I do like it more than Angara. B tier. An even smaller Electron. While Electron is a small sat launch vehicle, Helios is a nanosat launch vehicle. It is designed to deliver CubeSats weighing up to 20 kgs into orbit and has a minuscule launch cost of around $750,000. I'll give this a medium C tier, just above the other Electrons. Older, more expensive, slightly more capable Russian Electron. C tier. Skylon is a reusable single-stage to orbit, horizontal takeoff, horizontal landing spaceplane. Supposedly, it could carry up to 11 tons to low Earth orbit. It would use a special type of engine called a Sabre. The Sabre engine acts as a traditional air-breathing jet engine during the initial ascent, but around Mach 5.5 the air intakes would close and the engine would function as a conventional liquid-fueled rocket engine. Skylon has potential, but it also has an extreme lack of funding. Much research has been done into the concept, but little to no hardware has been produced. Low D tier, slightly above Venture Star. This is another horizontal takeoff, horizontal landing spaceplane. It also happens to be made by Dawn Aerospace, which is another New Zealand company. The Dawn Mark II is a suborbital launch vehicle that can carry 3 U-sized experiments to 100 kilometers and above, while taking off and landing from a standard commercial length runway. It also is capable of multiple flights in a single day. The Mark II is a 1/3 scale prototype of the Dawn Mark III, which will be able to do everything Mark II does and more, having the capacity to deliver 250 kilogram satellites to orbit. And unlike Skylon, Dawn Aerospace has already put hardware into space, the most recent being on the SpaceX Transporter 2 mission. Low B tier. The H-2B was a Japanese medium lift launch vehicle, capable of carrying 19 tons to low Earth orbit. Its primary payload was the Japanese HTV, which would resupply the International Space Station. Since the H-2B used solid rocket boosters and liquid hydrogen and oxygen on its first and second stages, it gets to be in a high C tier, just above the Long March 7. Falcon 1, cringe old unreliable Electron, high D tier. The N1 is an absolute monstrosity. Still the most powerful rocket ever launched though, for now. It had 5 stages in total, the first containing rings of 30 NK-15 engines, which, come to think of it, does sound somewhat familiar. For the lunar lander, a cosmonaut would actually have to EVA from the capsule to get into the lander. It does sadden me slightly that this Soviet monster never got to see the moon. Low A tier. Neutron, the fat shiny Falcon 9. Jokes aside, Peter Beck has said that the current version of Neutron doesn't really look at all like the Falcon 9 legged version that was announced in the Neutron reveal video. If Neutron launches from New Zealand, instant S tier. For now though, A tier, just above Electron. Soyuz is an absolute staple of spaceflight. I've never known a world where people haven't flown on Soyuz, and a world where Soyuz doesn't fly, well that scares me. I'd be kidding myself if I didn't put Soyuz in high A tier, up with the Falcon 9 and Atlas V. Spectrum by ISAR Aerospace Technologies, another small-sat launcher. European Electron, C tier. Vulcan is ULA's next generation launch vehicle. It uses methane and liquid oxygen in its first stage, and has the capacity for reuse of its engines. Insert overused joke here, and is intended to replace both Atlas V and Delta IV Heavy. High A tier, Transvulcan represent. Fully 3D printed Electron. I'll put this one in B tier with Astra's Rocket 3 because I'm actually quite interested in the idea of 3D printing rocket tanks. Russian Falcon 9, because that's cringe and it will piss off Roscosmos guy on Twitter. Low E tier. And that brings us to the end of this tier list. If you want to put yourself through immense pain, the link to this tier list is in the description so you can make and share your own tier list with me on Twitter. This video was an absolute bitch to make, so please like and subscribe and I'll be back again next month.